Welcome back to A Sharper Life. I'm your host, Nikki Sharp, a two-time best-selling author, wellness expert, and transformation coach. And I am here to talk all things that will ignite your passion for personal growth and empower you to live a life of purpose and fulfillment. Now, I know there is so much information out there on health, spirituality, relationships, biohacking, and more. That is why I bring on leading experts in each field, as I also share my own stories to help demystify what really works, what doesn't when it comes to truly changing your life. Now, this week, I am joined by Sara Reardon, a board-certified women's health and pelvic floor therapist. She is known as the Vagina Whisperer on social media. And in today's juicy episode, Sara is breaking down everything you need to know about your pelvic floor, common misconceptions about your body, and so much more. So this is a topic that every woman should feel comfortable to talk about, and yet it's one of the most taboo ones out there. So whether it's knowing what's normal versus what isn't about your vagina, why you're having painful sex, and what you're getting wrong about your vagina, this is a must listen to episode. So a few things, actually, we talk about a lot of things, but reasons that I think you're going to really enjoy this episode is that we are talking about common pelvic floor problems. So overactive bladder, pressure in the vagina, bowel issues, what a pelvic floor examination is and why you need one. And yes, this is different than when you go put in the stirrups, the straps with the kind of the duck thing going into you, the importance of Kegels and how to correctly do them. We talk about how 1 in 4 women have pain during sex and especially after childbirth, and how to fix this, as well as all about menopause and how this impacts your vagina and what you need to know about menopause, your body, your pelvic floor. So without further ado, please welcome Sara, aka the Vagina Whisperer, to A Sharper Life. Sara, it is such an honor and pleasure to have you on A Sharper Life. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Nikki.
Absolutely. So I want to get straight in. What do women not know that you wish they did about their vaginas?
Oh, so much. So I am a pelvic floor physical therapist, and we access the pelvic floor muscles through the vagina. And I think so many people don't even realize that this group of muscles exist. These are the muscles that contract and relax during an orgasm. They're the muscles that help keep in pee and poop at the urinary and anal sphincters. And they also have the vaginal opening for vaginal intercourse, menstruation, vaginal birth, sex. So there's so much going on out down there, and we see a very small piece of it, and we talk mostly about the vagina, but it's really part of this greater complex called the pelvic floor, which I really specialize in.
And so when it comes to then our pelvic floor and our vaginas, what are we getting wrong about it? What do we not know that you wish women knew?
It's fascinating because, when I talk to people in the community or some of my patients, they don't even know that we have 3 holes down there. Like there are, your pee does not come out of your vagina and your menstruation does not come out of your urethra. So some of just the basic anatomy that you have 3 openings in the vulva. The vagina is actually part of the vulva, which is kind of the labia, the clitoris, the inside of the lips, and the vagina is a canal. So I think one is just the basic anatomy that we're never really taught as young women, and even into older age, some of these myths still exist. I think some of the other things are that just some basic like hygiene, like you don't need to have a fruity, delicious smelling vagina. It kind of has its own very normal odor. The more things that you put on it, the unhealthier it becomes. So just rinsing with water and all natural ingredients is really what's best. That it's for more than sex. I think we often talk about the vagina just with respect to sexual intercourse or vaginal intercourse, but it plays so many other roles. And again, that, the things I wish people knew is that it's just there are muscles down there, and you can strengthen these muscles to help have stronger orgasms or better sex or less leakage. But sometimes these muscles are also tight, and that can lead to painful sex and difficulty having orgasms, which we don't always talk about that piece.
Very interesting. And I did actually want to get into Kegels and tightening of the muscles because we hear so much for women who have had pregnancy or had a child after pregnancy to do Kegels. Now, someone like me, I don't have children. Is that something that I should be doing? And what exactly is a Kegel and how do we do it?
Right. I think it's a great place to start is like, what is a Kegel exercise? So a Kegel is really a pelvic floor muscle contraction. So if you think about your bicep, it's a muscle that we can bend our elbow and we see that muscle kind of tighten up. Your pelvic floor is also a muscle, and doing a Kegel contraction, which is a squeezing of the sphincters, like you're stopping urine and holding in gas and lifting the muscle up. My favorite way to teach this is to tell people, think about sipping up a thick smoothie with your vagina. It's kind of like a pull up versus like a tighten and squeeze. So everybody, start sipping up smoothies with your vag, but it's a great way to kind of think about that squeeze and lift contraction. It's a great way to strengthen your pelvic floor. One, if you have weakness, but two, if you just want kind of enhanced sexual pleasure, stronger orgasms, preventative weakness measures. But again, a lot of people have tension. And I, for example, have tension in my neck and shoulders, and I get really bad headaches. A lot of us hold tension in our pelvic floor. And the way that we see that show up are ways of difficulty emptying your bladder, like you feel like you have to push to start your stream, difficulty emptying your bowels, you're constipated or have to strain, tailbone pain, hip pain, back pain, but also painful sex. Like if you have difficulty inserting anything into the vagina, a tampon, a speculum, a dildo, a penis, or pain with deeper intercourse. So all of those are kind of signs of tension, and Kegels would make that worse. And that's where you really want to focus on relaxation, breathing, stretching. So Kegels are great, but they're one thing. It's like saying if you have back pain, just do crunches. It's one small piece of the puzzle, but it's all we hear about, unfortunately, when it comes to your vagina.
So you mentioned that it's one piece of the puzzle. So I'd like to get into what are some of the other pieces and just kind of tailbacking on that with the Kegels. How often should we be doing them? Because like I've heard different things of, just do them throughout the day and try and tighten up. And it's like, well, it takes me thinking about doing it. And then if I'm thinking about doing it, my mind's not going somewhere else to do the thing that I, should be. So what's the optimal time frame? How long? And how long before you start to see results just from Kegels? And then we'll go on to what are the other pieces of the puzzle?
It's a great question. So, this is a muscle like any other muscle in your body. So it takes repetition, it takes time to strengthen it. So say you start doing bicep curls. To strengthen your bicep muscle, you just don't walk around with a weight in your hand and a bent elbow all day, right? You need to contract the muscle and then relax the muscle, contract the muscle and relax the muscle. So that's a lot of the times why I don't recommend using like Kegel balls or jade eggs or Benoit balls, because you're just putting something in your vagina and holding it tight. And that's not really how you strengthen a muscle over time. If you're going to do Kegel contractions, there's two different types. You want to do quick contractions, which are squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax. And then you want to do longer hold contractions where you squeeze and hold for 5 or 10 seconds and then rest for 5 or 10 seconds and squeeze and hold for 5 or 10 seconds. And that really works the whole muscle. You can do simply a set of 30 3 times a week. Like if you were going to do bicep curls, you don't need to do 100 of them every day of the week. But you also want to do them in different positions. So Nikki, you might say, oh, I love doing them when I'm sitting at my desk and they're really easy, but you don't really need strength just sitting at your desk. You want to do them in standing, walking, maybe in the shower, maybe when you're reheating coffee. So kind of find ways to do them in different positions and then bring them into your workouts. Like when I'm doing a squat, I Kegel before. When I'm doing a lunge, I Kegel before. So
Interesting.
think about it. It's a muscle. So you want to just find ways to kind of incorporate it into what you're doing once you've nailed the exercise, instead of just standing around Kegeling all day, right? So those are really ways to kind of work on strengthening your pelvic floor.
What I mean, two things just came up. One that it made me laugh that you're doing it, but then so often you hear, let's say you're doing like a bridge, and the trainer might say, "Okay, be sure that your abs are engaged in this." So now you're helping me understand that as it is a muscle that we want to be engaging it. It's sort of also like in yoga. If you're doing something and your legs are out long, they always say, "Okay, toes up, you want to get your feet engaged." So we're engaging different places so that there's not just, we're not just doing one thing. So that's quite interesting to know. The other thing that I came to mind when you were talking before is in an orgasm, something that I've noticed is that, yeah, my vagina does contract, and it like kind of that the smoothie effect. And so that's I take it a normal thing, and that's a good thing, but we want to actively start thinking consciously about that. Is that correct?
So for orgasms, I would say orgasms kind of happen when we are relaxed. So if you've, ever reached that point of climax, you kind of have to let go a little bit versus tighten up more. So I would say the way that these pelvic floor muscles work is that during arousal, they get engorged with blood. You've got a lot of really great healthy blood flow to the area, to the clitoris, which is kind of part of this complex. And then when you reach climax, your muscles contract, but they contract and relax. So it's a little bit, it can be a sucking up, it can be a wave. You've got different types of orgasms you can have, but it's the muscles themselves are not spasming, but contracting and relaxing. So that's normal. You don't need to do Kegels during that process. It's kind of naturally happening. And this is why we're like, more orgasms is better for your pelvic floor. It's like great blood flow and contraction. So, and just better for life in general, right? So you don't need to think about contracting during that process, but it is a natural contraction of your vagina and pelvic floor. When it comes to exercise, one of the things we don't talk about is that your pelvic floor muscles, which have the vagina and the vaginal opening as part of them, is that's the bottom of your core. So you've got your ab muscles in the front, your low back muscles in the back, and your pelvic floor is the floor of your core. So when you're bringing in your low abs during planks or leg lifts or bridges, you're really pulling in your pelvic floor as well. You don't always even realize it, but start being attentive to it. Like suck up that smoothie with your vag, and you'll even feel your abs come on with that. It really all works together. We just haven't thought about that as the way that the pelvic floor works, but it really is a part of the core complex.
So as you're talking about the pelvic floor, and I love just how easy to understand you're making all of this, let's get into like, why do women need to know about their pelvic floor and problems that are happening that you may not be aware of, that it's being caused by something to do with the pelvic floor?
When we think, about what the pelvic floor does is it's involved in our day-to-day function with urination, with bowel movements, with sex, with menstruation, with breathing, with exercise. So it's working for us all throughout the day and we don't even realize it. But if something goes wrong, you start leaking urine, you start having painful sex or tailbone pain, you start having hemorrhoids or constipation, your pelvic floor is involved. So it's important for us to know because we need to know what's normal and like what is involved in our day-to-day processes. But also if something's going wrong, we don't even know where to go for help. And so we haven't thought about pelvic floor specialists like myself or pelvic floor therapists who can really help address this muscle. We just think like, oh, maybe the leakage will get better. Or maybe if I keep, just using more lube with sex, it'll get better. Or if I just take this laxative or whatever, but it's really, there's therapy for this type of issue, but we don't even know about it because we don't talk about the pelvic floor and the vagina and the muscles down there.
I could not agree more. We learn a little bit about sex, the birds and the bees growing up in school or sometimes parents, but yeah, as a woman at 36 years old, I can't say like, I think I'm getting more enlightened in 11 minutes of our conversation than I've known anything about the pelvic floor. So it's a fascinating one for me because it's clearly such an important thing. And yet we as women don't know about it, which is nuts. So why
Right.
do you think that is though, Sara, that like we're so uneducated about this?
A lot of it is comfort level. I mean, we're talking about really intimate parts of our body, really kind of day-to-day functions like peeing and pooping and periods that have been taboo and kind of aren't normal dinner table conversation. At my home, they are, but I think for most homes, they are not. So I think one, it's a really intimate, vulnerable, sometimes embarrassing thing to talk about. So we don't even realize how common these things are, but research shows that 1 in 3 women will experience a pelvic floor disorder at some point in their lifetime. So either yourself or someone you know was affected by it. And of course, with, pregnancy or postpartum, that risk gets higher. And then going into perimenopause and menopause, even more with hormonal changes. So it's out there. I think we're not talking about it. I think that our unfortunate medical system is very siloed. Like, you go to somebody for your uterus, you go to somebody for your colon, you go to somebody for your foot, but like, who do you go to for your pelvis, right? And so that's really where I think pelvic floor therapists are starting to just raise awareness that there is a part of the body that we need to be aware of as women. We need to educate younger women, older women as well, and just realize that some of these issues are not normal, that we've kind of, normalized them with commercials or medications, but it's really, there is therapy for them, and women really deserve better care.
So you mentioned that we have issues and that 1 in 3 women have a disorder. What is a pelvic disorder? What does it look like? What do we need to know about that?
So the first thing is, I always really encourage my patients and patients and moms and women to kind of listen to your body. I think we know our bodies best. And oftentimes we're like, something just doesn't feel right down there. The way that these pelvic floor problems present is in all of these systems, whether it's sexual health, core support, bowel and bladder health. So let's say urinary function. Urinary leakage is obviously one of the more common ones. Overactive bladder syndrome, like feeling like you have to pee all the time, waking frequently at night to pee, feeling like you can't start your stream or that you can't empty all the way, burning with urination. When it comes to bowel movements, I would say hemorrhoids, fissures, constipation, straining with bowel movements, pain with bowel movements. When it comes to sexual health, it's difficulty having intercourse, pain with insertion, deeper insertion, difficulty having orgasms, pain with orgasms. And then core support. A lot of people have what's called diastasis recti, which is like a separation of the abdominals. It's really common during pregnancy and postpartum. But it looks like a little football kind of like coming out of the middle of your abs, or prolapse, when your organs aren't as supported and there's like a lot of heaviness or pressure in the vagina. All of those things are super common, but we don't even know that people are experiencing them because we don't talk about them. And so I really tell people to kind of tune in. If like something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And it's worth at least getting evaluated. My dream is that pelvic floor therapy becomes like going to the dentist. Like, it's just part of our normal healthcare. You go in once or twice a year for a checkup. If they find something like you would a cavity, you just get it addressed, and then you can kind of go on. But it really shouldn't be something that we're just like doing damage control once things are a problem. I think there's so much more proactive education we could do.
Amen to that. And I do feel like the US healthcare, and I'm sure other healthcares in the world, but specifically the US healthcare, I do feel like we are much more of a reactionary place where something happens and then it's like, okay, what do I go do now for that? In terms of a pelvic floor, because you want, as you said, you want this to be a checkup that people have every single year. What would a pelvic floor examination look like for a woman? Because like I'm asking this question because I don't even know. Like, I know that sometimes they put the little duck things inside my vagina and they look around,
totally.
but like, so what else is a pelvic exam?
Right. So it's similar but different. So if you've been to a gynecologist, you are in these stirrups with like a piece of tissue over your lap, and it's pretty terrible, to be honest. And there's a lot of metal clinking down there and you're not sure what's going on. So I would say that a pelvic floor muscle assessment is similar but different. So typically you go see a physical therapist and you just sit down and talk for 10 or 20 minutes. We ask you a lot of questions about all of these systems: bowel, bladder, sexual health, reproduction, childbirth, etc. And then the exam is external at first. So we look at your hips and low back, your pelvis alignment. All of that can be done with your clothes on. But to evaluate the pelvic floor muscles, we actually do an internal vaginal assessment, sometimes anal assessment, but it typically starts with a vaginal assessment. So you're lying on a like mat, covered in a sheet, but you're undressed from the waist down. And then the therapist asks you to do a Kegel. And we just watch, like, what do your muscles do externally as you do a Kegel? Are you doing it properly? And then we ask you to push your bear down, what does that look like? It should look like an opening up, like when you have a bowel movement or give birth. And then with a glove lubricated finger, we do insert a finger into the vagina, and then we ask you to do a Kegel again to see if we feel a squeeze, to see if we feel a relax, and then we press on the muscles to see if there's any tension or tightness. So we're looking for like how strong is the muscle, how weak is the muscle, is it too tense, is it relaxing well, is it coordinated? Like you would do any other muscle in your shoulder or back. And that gives us information like, okay, do we need to do strengthening and let's get on a strengthening regimen, or do we need to do more relaxation and lengthening and coordination training? And that's kind of where it starts. And then we build out like, okay, we need to teach you how to pee properly, poop properly, different positions for sex. I mean, it's fascinating because this is my day to day, but we just don't even know that there's resources for this and that people like me talk about this all day. And it's just really normal life.
So that actually leads me to the question of how did you get so interested in this and make it your life's mission, essentially, to help women understand about peeing and pooping and Kegels and their pelvic floor and their vaginas?
You know, I graduated from PT school 17 years ago, and I've only done this type of therapy. And I think initially I was like, oh, this is really fascinating to learn about my own body as a woman. But then once I got into the field and started teaching people about their bodies, it was just so rewarding to be able to educate them on something happening that they didn't even know there was help for. They didn't even understand their bodies. And then to finally see them get relief. I mean, when you have a young woman coming in who's never been able to have sex with her husband, and then she is able to pain-free for the first time and then gets pregnant, or you have a grandmother who can't pick up her kids because she's got leakage or bladder prolapse, and then she can finally start traveling again and going on vacation with them. And it's just these things that affect our quality of life we don't even realize. People can't work out or go to the gym because they're leaking urine. It's just fascinating to me that all of these things are existing and that I'm able to help people with them. It's incredibly rewarding. And it's also really frustrating because I think women's healthcare is in a dismal place and we need to do better. And I think you can't keep hearing these stories over and over for 17 years and think that, okay, we need to be doing more. And it really just came down to educating women. I mean, we were our best advocates. We're the David versus Goliath in these systems. And so it's really just been more people wanting information that's really kept me going and wanting to share more.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. Like that's everything that I do. It's very similar to you, getting to help someone to see a result they want or change their life or have more confidence. It's empowering for you. And then it's empowering obviously for the client. Now, as we're talking about all of these different things with these different systems down there, I guess where I want to go with this is, what are 5 tips that you wish that everyone knew right now? Like 5 things, either applicable tips or something that we don't know.
Amazing question. And they're going to seem so basic, yet they're so important. And I'm going to mainly address people with vaginas here, but all people have a pelvic floor. Male bodies, female bodies, transgender, everybody has a pelvic floor. But I'm going to talk to my folks with vaginas here. So I think the first thing is don't push when you pee. When you are peeing, you should be sitting on the toilet, not hovering, but not pushing. When you push when you pee, it actually weakens your pelvic floor over time and can lead to prolapse, leakage, and damage your pelvic floor. So just like sit and chill and pee. I feel like we're all so busy and you're just trying to rush through everything. But when you're peeing, just like chill and let your bladder push the urine out. The second thing is pooping. Everybody needs a squatty potty in their home. So these are those little stools that go under your feet when you're pooping. That helps put you in a position to relax your pelvic floor so that your bowels can empty better. The best position to poop is squatting. If you think about your inner nature, or if you even think about when people have babies and they're like, I think I'm going to poop, it's because their muscles are relaxed. So putting a stool under your feet when you're pooping is what helps you relax to poop and minimizes straining. Straining is really it's what leads to hemorrhoids and prolapse and leakage over time. Another thing is if you're entering perimenopause or menopause, use topical estrogen. There is so much research to support topical estrogen to plump up your vulvar and vaginal tissues, to maintain moisture for lubrication and pleasure, to minimize urinary tract infections and leakage. So like, get with a gynecologist or urologist, start using topical estrogen when you're in perimenopause, because that's going to keep your vagina like healthy over time. What we talked about today, exercise, that your pelvic floor is part of your core. So when you're pulling in your abs, you pull in that smoothie of your pelvic floor muscles, like pull in your vagina, because that's going to help keep it strong and engaged over time. And then I would say lastly is sex. Like sex should not be painful unless you want it to be. But if you have pain with sex, don't keep pushing through. It really 1 in 4 women has pain with sex at some point in their life, and it's never normal. So it's literally as simple as sometimes like a muscle stretch or a muscle release. It's so basic, but I think that there are so many barriers to intercourse these days, whether it's stress or time or sleep or side effects of medication, that we want this to be a pleasurable, enjoyable experience. It shouldn't just be tolerable. And I think that if we can support women during all of these basic things and just kind of normalize talking about them, like, okay, we at least have a baseline to start from, and then we know where to get help if something's not going right.
I feel like this is going to be a very listened to episode because, as you said, like it is still, I'm like you, I don't get it. Like clients come to me and they tell me all sorts of everything. And I'm like, great, you actually can't shock me with anything at this point. And I feel like you and I would have a really good time at a dinner table together. But it is fascinating to me because like, you're right. Like I don't sit there and have these conversations with my best friends and be like, yeah, so, I was really constipated the other day and I was put like, and that's a made up thing right now. But it's like, we don't have these conversations with people. And for some people, I understand it's the taboo, but I do feel like this will be a highly listened to episode because do you actually remember when 50 Shades of Grey came out and everyone was reading it?
Everybody.
Yes. Everyone was reading it. But I saw so many people on the London Tube reading it, but they had like the gray cover over it. So you couldn't see, like people didn't want other people to see that you were reading it. And that's what I sort of feel about everything you're talking about, like pooping and peeing and sex and our vaginas. And so it's so fascinating. Why do you feel that it's so taboo? Like 2024, why is all of this still taboo to talk about poop and pee and vaginas?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's becoming less taboo. Like the conversation we're having here is huge. I mean, I would even say 10 years ago, people weren't at dinner tables. They were scooting 2 seats away from me. They're like, wait, you put what, where, to do what? And now they're like leaning in, being like, hey, can we chat after? And so it's like the conversations are happening. And I also think it's okay that you don't want to tell your friend that you're constipated if that were to be the case, or that you have pain with sex. I mean, these are vulnerable topics. But the point is that you can tell someone, and that someone is a pelvic health specialist. So the things that people come in, I can't tell you time and time again how often I hear like, I've never told anyone this. I'm like, girl, these are the walls of secrecy. Like what we talk about in here is everything from like leakage with orgasms, or somebody asked me yesterday on social media, I feel like I have to poop when I'm having sex. It just like doesn't feel right. And I don't poop, but it feels like I'm going to, and then it just kills the moment. And I'm like, oh, well, that's because you got to poop. Like you got poop back there. Like you need to let's talk about how to poop better, but it's literally these things. I'm like, oh, there's like a simple solution to that. But if we don't talk about it, then we're kind of just suffering and we don't even know there's help. So it's totally fine to not talk to everyone about it, but there is someone you can talk to. And I still feel like, oh gosh, you can't shock me. I've heard everything, but I still get shocked. I think that, and more of what shocks me is not what people are dealing with, but how people are treated in the medical system, that they are dismissed, that they've sought care from multiple doctors, that they've been gaslit. And just that is what shocks me, is that as much work as we're doing to bring light to these issues, that women are still not being heard and treated the way that they need to.
Yeah, I would fully agree to that. And I know there's so many women who have been gaslit in the medical field, which is shocking. But going back to Instagram, you mentioned a question you received. What are a few of the most common questions that maybe when the person is asking it, they're probably thinking like, oh God, I'm the only person, but something that maybe is a little shocking for them, but you've received it enough times. So a few different questions that you receive.
So I just, posted a question box the other day on sex, and sex is always kind of a juicy topic because it's fun to talk about. But I think one of the more common ones is, I would say related to pregnancy and birth. Like a lot of people have pain with sex after giving birth, and it's not just vaginal birth; it's cesarean birth as well. So they're like, "Hey, I had a C-section 6 months ago, and like sex is super painful, and it's still painful. But I had a C-section. Like, why is my vagina hurting?" And it's because so much changes just during pregnancy that affects your vagina. And a C-section, you have scar tissue on your abdomen, and that affects your pelvic floor because, again, your core is connected to your pelvic floor. So I think that, related to a lot with like pain with sex. I mean, I've experienced pain with sex myself, and I'm going, okay, I can just press on this muscle and do this thing here, and that's going to help. And I kind of have a recipe to help, but most people don't have access to that. So I think a lot related to painful sex. Some of the juicier questions are like leakage with orgasms. It actually happens like in 1 in 10 women, and we don't talk about it, but they're like, is squirting good? Is it bad? It feels embarrassing, or I feel like it's a superpower. But it's leakage of urine. It's studies that show that it's really the majority is urine. There's a little bit of vaginal secretions in there, but it's fine if it's fine for you. But if it's not fine for you, then therapy can help because it's really strengthening your pelvic floor muscles and doing some work on your bladder. Other questions are people don't realize that like hemorrhoids or fissures or, those things are related to your pelvic floor. It's all pressure and how you're pooping. So teaching people to poop better is like a huge thing for their pelvic floor. And then, those are some of the more common ones. They're pretty basic. Menopause is another one. They're like, is my vagina going to shrivel up and just like sleep for the next 20 years? Like, is my vagina doomed? I'm like, no, there's so much you can do. Hormones play a huge role in our vaginal health. When you are on birth control, if you are taking fertility treatments, if you are postpartum and breastfeeding, if you're perimenopausal or menopausal, you have less estrogen in your body. And estrogen is a hormone that plumps up your vagina. It gets things lubricated. It gives you a higher libido. It thickens the tissue. So if you don't have higher estrogen levels or they're too low or depleted, it leads to dryness and thinning and bleeding and pain. So people just aren't even connecting these dots because we don't even know like what's going on down there. I literally tell people like pull out a mirror and look at your vag. Like,
I was gonna ask actually if you recommend doing that.
oh yes, I totally recommend people looking at this part of their body. I think we need to know what it looks like. I think we need to get a little bit comfortable with it. I'm not even asking you to touch it. I'm just asking you to look. Do a Kegel. What does your vagina do? Does it kind of close and lift up, or does it push out, which is the opposite? Look at, do the tissues look healthy? Do they look dry? Do they look pink? Do they look brown? Like, know what kind of your normal is. So if something's wrong, you kind of know what an abnormal is. And then you can totally insert a finger into your vagina, see what the inside feels like. Do a squeeze. Can you feel a squeeze? I know that this is a big ask for people, but to me, this is just a part of our body, like working with an ankle. We just don't see it. So if you get comfortable with it, I think that will empower you. I also think it's important to know what pleasures you. When people are like, I can't have orgasms with my partner, like, what do I do? I'm like, try to have an orgasm by yourself. Like, self-stimulate, like use a vibrator, to dildo, like use your hand. But if you don't know what feels good to you, you can't communicate that to another partner either. So it really starts with self-exploration.
Oh my goodness. You just went into so many different things. I want to touch on all of that. Oh my, I'm like, I have a question there, I have a question there. So actually, I'd love to talk more about pregnancy because I know there's a lot of women who follow this podcast or in my community who are either pregnant now or they've had kids, a kid or multiple kids. So let's talk about how the pelvic floor is affected by pregnancy. For the first one, what happens afterwards? And then is that the same if you have multiple children?
Great question. And I think pregnancy is really a season where so much of your pelvic floor and vagina change. And you're like, whoa, is this normal? Or, do I just deal with it? So during pregnancy, that pelvic floor is like a hammock that supports your growing baby. And as baby gets bigger and bigger, so we're used to getting the text messages or emails that are like, your baby's an avocado or your baby's a papaya. Well, at the end, your baby's a watermelon. So think of a watermelon sitting in a hammock. That hammock is going to sink lower. It's going to get more stretched out. And that's what happens to your pelvic floor muscles. So pregnancy itself can lead to pelvic floor weakness and abdominal weakness. So that can result in that diastasis recti, which is that kind of separation of the abs that looks like a little cone or football when you crunch up. It can lead to leakage, prolapse, hemorrhoids. Not for everyone. So I really encourage people to work with a therapist or do strengthening exercises during pregnancy and also to help prepare for birth. And then childbirth itself is a whole separate thing. 30% of moms are having C-sections. So that's major abdominal surgery that they need to recover from. And then vaginally, some people experience a small tear or pushing for a long time that can weaken the pelvic floor muscles. So really, therapy or exercise and for this part of your body needs to be the standard of care. In other European countries like France or in Korea or Asian countries like Korea, or really there's a much more holistic postpartum care model. Here it's like, see ya, in the US. So we really want moms to work with a therapist postpartum to rehab their bodies. Because so much does change and it doesn't just kind of come back together. You've gone through 9 months, 10 months of pregnancy and then birth as an additional factor. So I think a lot changes that we want to address.
That's so fascinating. The question there, because you touched on other countries' healthcare when it comes to aftercare for pregnancy, what are other countries doing for the woman and for her body that we are not doing?
So it's really a system approach that is very different than in the United States. So it starts with things like, maternal health care is covered by all insurance, in other countries. You get paid time off. In the US, 40% of moms are back to work within a couple of weeks. So that's pretty fast. I mean, you're literally still bleeding after giving birth and you're back at work. And there's, within the first 5 years after birth, like almost 50% of moms leave the workforce at some period of time because it's hard. We're just never from the beginning, we feel like we're playing catch up. So the healthcare coverage, the paid maternal leave or parental leave even, but with respect to the physical recovery, we really have one visit postpartum at 6 weeks. Sometimes it's 4 weeks if you have a C-section. There's no care in between those, day 1 to week 6, and there's no care after. So at that 6-week visit, you get like a thumbs up to return to sex or exercise, and then that's it. Like, what if you leak when you exercise? What if you have pain with sex? There's no follow-up. So I think really it's pretty dismal what we're experiencing here. And I think it's really leading to much longer term physical and maternal health issues that just, I really think could be prevented if we had a more consistent check-in schedule with moms. I know in France, it's automatic that you get sent to pelvic floor physio. You have midwives or nurses come to the home to see you in the postpartum period. In India, my husband's Indian, but they do like a 30-day, sitting in where they have people come cook for you and give you massages and they do vaginal steaming. But really it's just kind of nurturing the mom instead of all the focus on nurturing the baby.
Oh, I love that you actually just brought that up, because in your TED Talk, you kind of lead in and say, we've been educated to care for our babies, but not our bodies. And that touched me so much because it's so true. And just as you said now that, moms then focus so much on the child and sort of like forget about themselves. And so let's say there's a woman, she's just given birth. What are some things that you want her to know to start doing? Like, I have a friend, had a baby a few months ago. What advice do you have brand new moms?
So I think we kind of break it up into kind of sections. So like the really, really early postpartum phase, which is like week 1 to 12, you have got to slow down. I mean, I think sometimes we have other kids or we're back to work or we're trying to go to the gym. It's like your body is literally still healing. And the sooner you do stuff, get back to running or work or whatever, which unfortunately is the reality for people. We don't have childcare. We have to work. the harder it is for your body to recover. So my moms who I see in that first 12-week period kind of take it a little bit slower from a pelvic floor perspective, do better in the long run. You also have to actively rehab your pelvic floor, whether you've had a C-section or a vaginal birth. So I have a whole online exercise program because I was like, people don't know what to do in the first 6 weeks. I talk you through like, how do you poop in the beginning? How do you pee in the beginning? How do you massage your cesarean scar? How do you massage your perineal scar? Like just a lot of these things that I think should be incorporated into postpartum rehab. And then where do you start with exercise? It's literally starting with simple things like you mentioned, bridges, lunges, squats, ball squeezes, modified planks and push-ups, kind of rebuilding that core instead of either moms feeling like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing, or this is where I was before I was pregnant, so let me just go back to doing that, but their bodies aren't quite where they need to be. So it's really kind of building up that core foundation. Once you get a little bit further out, it's never too late to work on your core or your scars or anything like that. I really think that whole first year, especially if you're lactating or breastfeeding, it's really a recovery process while you're still rebuilding strength.
And then in terms of sex, for someone who's just had a baby, what is the optimal time frame before they start having sex again for their pelvic floor?
So from a kind of medical perspective, it's always recommended to wait 6 weeks. A lot of that has more to do with decreasing the risk of a uterine infection. So you don't really want anything in the vagina for the first 6 weeks. And that like a tampon, a pessary, a finger, a penis, because the cervix is still closing and you want to make sure that no bacteria kind of can get in and infect the uterus. So at the 6-week mark is kind of from a medical perspective. I would say from a tissue healing perspective, it is fine to wait longer. Like if you need to wait till 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the case may be, because those tissues are still healing. I see people in my office at 6 weeks and they still have stitches in their vagina. They still have, a slight tear and they're bleeding if I touch the area. So like, it's just really early. So but also some people feel totally fine and they're good to go. So one of it is like when your body feels ready. From a pelvic floor perspective, I think at least 6 weeks, and 8 to 12 weeks is even longer. You do want to make sure you use a lubricant when you return to intercourse because there is typically some vaginal dryness because of lower estrogen levels, especially if you're lactating. If you do have pain, pause, don't push through it. You may need to do a little bit of massage to your scar at the vaginal opening or even massage to your C-section scar. Both of those things can help really relax the tissues and make sex more comfortable.
So this is thank you for all of that information. And as someone who doesn't have a child yet, I do hope to have a family one day. In terms of the vagina then, and we're talking about the pelvic floor, but let's go specifically to the vagina. As you said, you have a watermelon and that watermelon is coming out of that vagina. Now, I can imagine that the vagina is it opens up a lot. Does it immediately go back and kind of shrink to what it was? And, you then have that tight vagina, or does it remain loose? And if so, what can women do about that?
So to be super honest, it remains a little loose. And it's because it's not just birth, it is that pregnancy process. So during that 10-month pregnancy process and hormones that like soften and lengthen, like during pregnancy and birth, you want things to be released. This is why we get like loosey-goosey ligaments and really hypermobile during pregnancy, is because hormones in our body are helping things relax. That's kind of what we want so our pelvis can expand. And these muscles can lengthen. So you really do want to actively rehabilitate, strengthen for weakness after postpartum. There's still some shrinkage that can happen to the tissues just from not being pregnant and your hormones going back to normal. If you do breastfeed or lactate, that laxity tends to last a little bit longer, again, because of lower estrogen levels when you're breastfeeding. But yes, you do want to kind of re-strengthen. It doesn't just necessarily go back. For some folks it does, but I would say that more often you want to be on the proactive side.
Very, very interesting. Well, I will absolutely be coming to you when I get pregnant, and I'm sure there's the pre-care and post-care, aftercare. Where can people find you, Sara? Where can people find you?
So we mentioned my Instagram. So on Instagram, I'm the Vagina Whisperer. There are some really great videos that are educational and sometimes funny, and sometimes I'm dressed in a vulva suit to do them. On TikTok, I'm the Vag Whisperer. So both of those are great places just kind of to get a sense of what I do and, quick pelvic floor tips to help. And then my website is thevaginawhisperer.com, where I have an online really pelvic floor and core workout program. Like, I'm not a fitness trainer. I'm not, I really focus on just this specific pelvic floor region. And I made these workouts. They're 10 minutes, 3 times a week. So very accessible. And I was like, okay, what can I do as a busy working woman? And what could my mom do as, an older woman in her 70s to strengthen her pelvic floor? And what could, somebody in their 20s who wants to kind of start connecting with this part of their body do? So it's very accessible. There's a lot of strengthening, but there's also a lot of relaxation stuff if you do have pelvic floor tension or painful sex. So it's really, it's something that was a dream that I was like, I want people to have this for every week of pregnancy or postpartum. There's workouts and just really a guide for you and your pelvic floor to kind of know how to take care of it and to how to overcome issues you might be experiencing.
Incredible. And I will, of course, put everything in the show notes. So my very last question for you is, what are your 3, and you've already given so many different tips, but if you had to sum it up, what are your 3 top tips for someone to live a sharper life when it comes to their vagina, the pelvic floor, peeing and pooping, sex, and all the juicy taboo subjects?
So much good stuff. Well, I think I shared a lot of them, but I would even pull back a little bit from kind of the nitty gritty details. And I would say, really trust your intuition. I think so often if something is wrong, we kind of be like, oh, it's fine, or, oh, I don't worry about it, or like, I'm too busy. Like, if something feels wrong or not right in your body, listen to that. And if you see a medical provider who dismisses you or just doesn't jive or tells you it's not a problem, but you still feel like it's a problem, like, keep advocating for yourself. Like, lean into your intuition because it will be your guide in your healthcare journey. You unfortunately have to be the driver in your healthcare. I think the other thing is to share your stories. I think that there are so many women out there who really are experiencing these issues, and it's incredibly rewarding to help someone else who didn't know that this type of therapy existed. Or, it's funny because it used to be like, well, how do people find out about physical therapy for your vagina? I'm like, the bathroom line in the ladies' room. Like, now people are just like, oh, are you pushing when you pee? Like, you shouldn't be doing that, So I think it's just share your stories because, I think that women are our own, we all advocate for one another. And if you, one, know that you're not alone, but 2, you can also help other people. And I guess the third one is, really kind of just start putting in some of those proactive practices we mentioned early to protect your pelvic floor, about not pushing when you pee, not straining when you poop. And it's those daily habits. It's not even birth sometimes. It is really those daily habits that we're integrating that really help us live our best life and protect our pelvic floors. It's like the equivalent of flossing and brushing your teeth. Like, you got to take good care of it and it will serve you better in the long run.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sara, for coming on The Vagina Whisperer. Everyone, please go follow her. She's absolutely amazing. And until next week, here's to a sharper life.